The day they tore through my driveway, I learned something about people with deadlines and money. They'll convince themselves your property is just part of their schedule if it saves them 20 minutes. And the wild part is, when I first saw what they'd done, standing there with gravel dust on my boots and a concrete truck blocking the only road to my house, I honestly thought there had to be some mistake. Nobody could be that arrogant on purpose. Turns out I was wrong. I live outside Millbrook, Indiana, on about 12 acres my grandfather bought before I was born. Flat farmland, long stretches of soybeans around me, one red barn, one old white farmhouse that leans a little more every winter, but still feels like home, and one gravel driveway running from the county road all the way back to the house. It's not pretty, never was, but it's solid. 40-plus years of crushed limestone packed tight as concrete, with drainage ditches cut on both sides because around here, if you don't respect water, water teaches you respect the hard way. That driveway mattered more than people realized. It wasn't decoration. It was access. Feed deliveries came down it. Fuel trucks came down it. Every truck I ever owned rattled down that stretch of gravel. If something happened to it, I wasn't parking somewhere else and figuring it out. There wasn't another road. For most of my life, nobody bothered me out there. Neighbors waved, kept to themselves, maybe borrowed equipment once in a while. Then the lot east of me sold. That property had been empty forever, brush and weeds mostly. But suddenly signs went up, survey stakes, contractors, then excavation. A company called Summit Ridge Custom Homes bought it, big operation. Their plan was a 6-bedroom luxury spec house with stone veneer, oversized windows, massive front porch, the kind of place built for brochures and drone footage. First week of layout, their site supervisor stopped by. His name was Trevor Maddox. Trevor had that polished contractor confidence, spotless pickup, mirrored sunglasses, expensive boots that somehow never looked dusty. Friendly enough. He walked up smiling like we were already buddies. "Morning," he said. "Just wanted to introduce myself. We're gonna be neighbors for a while." I said sure. He asked about property lines, asked about drainage, asked where runoff usually pooled after storms. Then he looked down my driveway. He stood there a second longer than necessary. "How old's this?" I laughed. "Longer than I've lived here." He nodded slowly. "Still holding up nice." That was it, or so I thought. For about 6 weeks, things stayed normal. Crews came and went. Lumber deliveries. Excavators. Nail guns buzzing all day. Annoying, but manageable. Trevor waved whenever he saw me. Sometimes we talked for a minute. He always seemed easygoing. Then one Tuesday I left early for work in town. Nothing unusual. Blue sky, coffee in the cup holder, gravel crunching under my tires. And when I came back that afternoon, I saw dust hanging in the air before I even reached my mailbox. At first I figured maybe one of their dump trucks had blown past. Then I turned in, and my stomach dropped so hard it felt like I missed a stair. Half my driveway was gone. Not damaged, gone. The gravel had been scraped off in a wide strip. Base layer dug out. Deep equipment tracks cut straight through the center. Mud churned everywhere. And sitting dead in the middle of it was a concrete truck. Big rotating drum, turning slow. Pouring wet concrete into foundation forms stretched across the edge of my access road. I stopped the truck, got out, and just stood there. One of the crew guys yelled something over the engine. I walked straight toward him. "What exactly are you doing?" He wiped sweat off his forehead and looked confused. "Pouring footer." "You're pouring it across my driveway." He looked back toward the forms, then at me. "Trevor told us this old access lane wasn't active." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. That sharp kind of laugh when your brain hasn't caught up yet. "Old access lane? Yeah, that's my driveway." His face changed instantly, and right then I heard concrete sliding out of the chute. Still pouring. Like even while we were talking, they were burying the problem. I pulled out my phone and called Trevor. Straight to voicemail. Called again. No answer. Third time he picked up. Wind noise in the background. He sounded distracted. "Hey, what's up?" "What's up is your crew just ripped out half my driveway." Pause. "Then, we needed access. You tore up private property. It's temporary. I can't get to my house." He exhaled like I was inconveniencing him. "We'll spread fresh gravel after we finish." I looked at the trench, at the truck, at concrete literally hardening across my road. "That's not your call." "It's gravel, Ethan." That was his tone. Flat, dismissive, like I was upset over lawn ornaments. "It's just gravel. We're on a tight build, and something in me went completely calm. That kind of calm that scares even you. I didn't yell, didn't argue, just said, okay, then hung up. The foreman watched me standing there. I started taking pictures. Every angle. The trench, tire tracks, wet concrete, property stakes, the truck plates, the drainage ditch crushed under equipment, everything. Then I called my neighbor Frank 2 parcels over. Frank's retired Army Corps of Engineers. Knows more about grading and runoff than anyone I've met. He drove over in 15 minutes, climbed out of his truck, looked around, didn't say a word for a solid minute, then finally muttered, "Well, they really picked the worst possible place to get stupid." He crouched by the ditch, checked the slope, pressed a boot against the exposed base, then looked up at me. "They contaminated the subgrade with mud. Drainage is compromised too. Can it be fixed?" "Sure. How bad?" Frank stood up slowly. "Expensive." That evening, I called my attorney, Margaret Hale. Small office in town, sharp as broken glass. I sent her every photo. She called back 20 minutes later. No hello. Just, "Did you give them permission?" "No." "Any easement?" "No." "Can you currently access your house?" "Barely." Silence. Then she said, "Don't touch anything. I'm filing tonight." I remember walking out onto my porch after sunset, looking toward the construction lights next door, listening to backup alarms and engines still running. Trevor's crew moving around like it was just another workday, like they hadn't bulldozed the only road I had. And I kept thinking, maybe he really believed he could smooth it over with a truckload of gravel and an apology later. Maybe he'd done that before. Maybe people usually just let it slide. But I wasn't letting this slide. And Trevor Maddox had no idea that by sunrise the next morning, his entire build schedule was about to stop cold. By 7:30 the next morning, I was standing at my kitchen window with a fresh cup of coffee, still in jeans and work boots, watching Trevor's crew roll in like any normal Wednesday. Pickup trucks lined the shoulder, subcontractors unloaded gear, somebody backed a skid steer off a trailer, and for maybe 10 minutes the whole place buzzed like nothing had changed. Then a county sheriff's SUV pulled up behind the concrete forms, and everything stopped. Not gradually, not awkwardly, just dead still, like somebody killed the power to the whole site. A deputy stepped out with paperwork in hand, walked straight past the framing crew and flagged Trevor down while half the workers stared. I couldn't hear every word from my porch, but I saw Trevor take the paperwork, glance down, then back up, then down again. His face changed. The confidence disappeared first, then the color. He looked toward my property, saw me standing there, coffee mug in one hand, and even from that distance I could tell exactly what he was thinking. He hadn't expected me to do anything. That was the whole calculation. People like Trevor count on momentum. They move fast, create inconvenience, then offer some half-hearted fix after the damage is done. Most people don't have the time or energy to fight. Margaret wasn't most people. The emergency injunction had been approved before sunrise. Temporary stop work order. No equipment movement. No additional pouring. No work beyond their survey boundary. No exceptions. Trevor came marching down my driveway 10 minutes later. Didn't knock, didn't wave, just stormed halfway up like he owned the place. "Are you serious?" I stepped off the porch. "I am." "You shut down an entire build over gravel?" I almost smiled. "No." "You shut down your build over gravel?" He pointed toward the site. "I've got crews booked out for weeks. And I had a driveway yesterday." He clenched his jaw. This could have been handled with a conversation. That one actually made me laugh. "A conversation? You mean the one before or after you dug through my land?" He got real quiet then. That kind of quiet where somebody realizes charm isn't working anymore. Then he tried a different angle. "Look, I'll pay to dump fresh stone." Frank had come by again and happened to be leaning against his truck nearby. He called out without even looking up. "Fresh stone on top of mud won't hold through one rain." Trevor ignored him. "I didn't." I said, "He's right." Trevor rubbed his forehead. "How much are we talking?" I told him I'd let the engineer answer that. And by noon, we had won. Margaret had brought in a civil engineer named Dana Mercer from Bloomington, mid-50s, practical, sharp-eyed, clipboard in one hand, and zero patience in the other. Dana walked the whole damage line, measured depth, checked the crushed drainage channels, examined where concrete washout had bled into the gravel base, took photos, made notes. Trevor hovered nearby trying to sound cooperative. Dana finally stood up and looked him dead in the eye. "You didn't just remove gravel. He folded his arms. It's repairable. She nodded. Everything's repairable. Then she pointed toward the ditch. That slope was engineered over decades through settlement and maintenance. Your equipment collapsed the drainage shoulder. The sub-base is contaminated. Water's going to pool here, freeze here, and destabilize everything unless it's rebuilt correctly. Trevor asked, "So what's the number?" Dana answered without blinking, 14,000 minimum. Trevor laughed, then realized nobody else was laughing. He looked at me. "You can't be serious." Dana flipped a page. "Actually, that's conservative." Frank muttered, "Told you." Trevor turned red. The next few days were almost surreal. The site sat frozen. Huge stacks of lumber under tarps. Concrete forms untouched. Trucks showing up, then leaving. Electricians rescheduling. Plumbers backing out. Every delay costing money. And every morning Trevor had to stand there explaining to somebody else why the project wasn't moving. Meanwhile, Margaret moved fast. Trespass, property damage, loss of access, construction beyond property line without easement. She filed everything. Trevor's company hired counsel. Then they tried the miscommunication defense. Their attorney claimed Trevor believed it was an abandoned farm access road. Margaret slid 40 years of tax records and property surveys across the table. Then photos. Then Dana's engineering report. Then she asked, calm as ever, "Would you like to continue with abandoned?" That shut the room up. Trevor stopped coming near the house after that, but I saw him pacing, phone glued to his ear, pointing at schedules, yelling at suppliers. A week later, Summit Ridge sent their regional director, guy named Richard Baines. Tall, gray hair, expensive coat, handshake like a bank manager. He asked if we could talk. We stood by the fence. He started polite. "Mr. Mercer, we'd like to resolve this." I nodded. "Good. We're willing to restore the gravel." "No," he blinked. "No. Restore it properly." He sighed. "Surely there's room here." There was, before Trevor dug through it. Richard glanced toward the site, then lowered his voice. "You understand every day this sits costs real money." I looked at him. "I imagine that's how property damage feels." That landed. He stared for a second, then nodded once. "Fair enough." Court moved faster than anyone expected. Small county judges don't love construction companies trampling land boundaries, especially when the evidence is clean. Dana testified. Frank testified. The concrete foreman testified too. And honestly, that was probably the turning point. He admitted Trevor told him the driveway wasn't really being used. The judge raised one eyebrow. "That was your understanding?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you observed a mailbox, active tire tracks, and a residence at the end of it?" "Yes, yes." The courtroom actually got quiet enough to hear papers turning. Then Trevor took the stand, tried to sound reasonable, said they were under pressure. Schedule was tight. Access was difficult. He believed temporary use would be harmless. Then Margaret asked one question. "Did you ask permission?" Trevor looked at the floor. "No." That was it. Decision came down 3 days later. Full restoration, professional grading, contaminated soil removal, drainage reconstruction, compacted limestone resurfacing, plus damages for loss of use, plus penalties for exceeding property boundary. Trevor looked physically sick hearing it, and honestly, if that had been the end, it would have been enough, but it wasn't. It's because the stop work order had done something money couldn't easily fix. It shattered their schedule. Their foundation pour had cured uneven because work paused halfway. Subcontractors reshuffled. Inspection windows got missed. Framing crews got reassigned. The dominoes kept falling. And then one afternoon I saw something that almost made me feel bad. Almost. Trevor pulled up. Loaded boxes into his truck. No hard hat. No clipboard. No swagger. Just stiff shoulders and silence. Frank watched from beside me. Guess corporate found a scapegoat. I said nothing. Trevor glanced once toward my porch, long enough for eye contact. Didn't wave, didn't apologize, then drove off. A replacement crew took over a few days later, and they were polite, very polite. Asked before stepping near the property line, double-checked every stake, kept equipment well clear. One guy even joked, "We heard enough stories about this driveway to treat it like federal land." I laughed, but inside, I was thinking something else. Because the driveway still wasn't rebuilt yet, Dana had one more requirement. The entire damaged section had to be excavated deeper than expected, meaning Summit Ridge was about to rebuild the whole thing, and because of the concrete contamination they caused, They were going to have to tear part of it back out and do sections again, which meant Trevor's little shortcut had officially turned into the most expensive driveway detour anybody in Millbrook had ever seen. And the final part of that story was somehow even more satisfying than I expected. By the time Summit Ridge finally started rebuilding my driveway, summer had already started leaning toward fall. The corn across the road had gone tall and gold. Evenings cooled off enough for a jacket, and the giant stone mansion next door still looked half-finished, like somebody had pressed pause on a very expensive dream. In my driveway, that thing had become the most inspected stretch of gravel in Indiana. Dana Mercer ran the rebuild like she took it personally. Every load of stone got checked, every inch of grading measured, drainage slope verified twice, compaction tested. Frank joked she gave more attention to that driveway than some people give a new bridge. She smirked and said, "A bridge would complain less." The first rebuild took nearly a week. Excavators cut deeper than Trevor ever imagined. Contaminated soil hauled off. Drainage trenches reshaped. Fresh limestone base layered in. Steamroller packed everything down. It looked beautiful. Honestly better than it had in years. Then Dana spotted concrete residue still trapped deeper near the edge where the original pour had crossed, and she stopped everything. I was standing nearby when she waved the contractor over. "Dig it out." The foreman looked exhausted. "We already compacted." "Dig it out. That'll mean redoing this whole section." Dana shrugged. "Then redo it." And there it was. The moment Trevor's shortcut officially became legend around town. They rebuilt the damaged section, then had to tear part of it back out, then rebuild it again. Exactly the thing Trevor thought he was avoiding in the first place. Extra time and extra cost. Frank stood there with his hands in his pockets and whispered, "That's gotta sting." I said, "Probably more than asking permission would've." By October, my driveway was finished. Smooth, solid, perfect drainage. Fresh, bright limestone crunching under the tires. Better than I'd ever seen it. And every time I drove down it, I'll admit, there was a tiny bit of satisfaction hearing those tires roll. Not because I won. It honestly wasn't even about that anymore. It was about being reminded that boundaries matter. People get weird around land, especially when money gets involved. Especially when somebody thinks speed matters more than respect. The mansion next door kept dragging. Inspection delays. Missed contractor windows. Material shortages after rescheduling. Everything that could go sideways did. That 6-month build turned into almost a year. 9 months after Trevor tore through my driveway, the place still wasn't fully done. Stone veneer finally up. Windows in. Landscaping unfinished. Temporary fencing still leaning crooked near the side yard. One evening, I was bringing feed back to the barn when a black SUV pulled into their driveway. Richard Baines stepped out. Same expensive coat, same polished look. But this time, he didn't come with a negotiation face. He came looking tired. He walked over while I unloaded bags. "Evening." "Evening." He looked down the driveway. Nodded once. "Looks great." Dana made sure of that. He gave a dry little laugh. "Yeah, she definitely did." Then he stood there for a second and surprised me. He said, "Trevor should have asked." Simple. No legal language. No excuses. Just honest. I leaned against the truck. Would have saved everyone a lot. He nodded. Corporate agreed. Then he looked back at the house. "We lost a lot more than 14 grand on this one." I believed him. He asked if I minded crews finishing landscaping over the next couple weeks. Promised they'd stay clear. I told him if they respected the line, we had no issue. And that was that. He shook my hand and left. No dramatic ending. No yelling. Just a tired man realizing arrogance is expensive. A couple months later, the house finally sold. Young couple from Indianapolis. Nice people. They brought cookies over first week. Said they'd heard bits and pieces about construction drama. I laughed and said, "Millbrook has a way of turning one bad week into local folklore." The husband glanced toward my driveway and grinned. "Is it true they rebuilt that thing twice?" Frank happened to be helping me stack firewood. Didn't even look up. Twice and then some. We all laughed. But later that night, I sat on the porch by myself with a beer. Gravel drive glowing pale under the porch light. Cold air moving through the trees. And I thought about how weird the whole thing had been. Because here's the truth. I never wanted revenge. I never woke up hoping somebody next door would get buried in legal fees and delays. I just wanted the one thing every property owner deserves. Respect. A knock on the door, 30 seconds of honesty. "Hey, can we talk?" That was all Trevor had to do. One conversation. Maybe we could have worked something out. Maybe I would have let them cross temporarily with conditions. Maybe none of it turns into court filings and sheriffs and corporate damage control. But arrogance has a funny way of making expensive choices feel smart right up until reality hands you the invoice. And Trevor learned that lesson with a half-finished mansion sitting still for months and a gravel driveway rebuilt twice because he decided it's just gravel. To this day, every delivery driver that comes down that road says the same thing. Nice driveway. And every single time I smile. Because yeah, it is. Now I'm curious what you would have done. If somebody tore through the only road to your home without permission and then brushed it off like it was nothing, would you have taken them to court like I did? Or would you have handled it another way? Tell me down in the comments. Because I've heard people argue both sides of this one. And honestly, I still think about it sometimes. Was stopping the entire build justified? Or should I have accepted the gravel and let it go? Let me know what you think. And if you've ever had a neighbor cross a line and act like it was no big deal, I definitely want to hear that story too.